Hey guys, this is Natalie Cutler-Welsh here. Welcome back to another episode of the Impact Entrepreneur series. You guys know I'm so excited about this series because, gosh, we do need a little bit of support and guidance when it comes to resilience and wellness in New Zealand and beyond. And so today I'm reaching across to Australia to talk to the lovely Pat Armitstead, and we are going to talk about the topic of mental health in the workplace. Welcome, Pat.
Hello, nice to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. This is exciting. So Pat is a speaker and author, and I believe an MBIT coach. She will elaborate on what the MBIT coach is. But I'm super excited to dive into this topic because there are a lot of stressed people out there rushing back and forth and working under a lot of pressure. So we're going to dive into that today. And this is Pat's area of expertise. So Pat, can you tell us a little bit of your background story, kind of what are you working on at the moment and what is it that brought you here? What was your path to this place?
I began my working life as a registered nurse and nursed for 16 years. Then by default ended up in advertising and did that for 11 years. And then at the turn of the century, I experienced a whole series of losses. And rather than be medicated, I looked for another way. So Joyology was founded in that mess. And ever since then, I've been bringing together my compassion and my creativity to serve humanity. You know, I don't think we've ever been so challenged emotionally and psychologically. We're evolving, and there's a lot about evolution that's pretty tough sometimes. So, you know, being equipped for our own evolution, but also being able to be in a place to support other people. So the M-Braining was founded, I'm not sure how many years ago, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, by Grant Sasulo and Marvin Oka. And it's essentially, they developed a process whereby the coach engages with the head, the heart, and the gut brain of the client, and you lead them through a process, and it's just extraordinary for the ease with which things that can take sometimes days to surface. It just allows easier access.
Is this something that you use when you're working with people, mentoring people? You use the head, the heart, and the gut brain?
Yes.
Yeah. So cool. Maybe we can dive into that a little bit later when we're talking about mental health in the workplace. I love that you mentioned evolving because, yeah, I think we are evolving, and it's an interesting time. I mean, I think it's an interesting time. I'm doing another interview later with my co-author, Jackie Lockington. We're actually bringing out a series focused on teens and tweens. So I think that it's such an interesting time, you know, as a parent, and we're going to be talking about empowered parenting. But also, like today, we're talking about, it's just such an interesting time for everybody getting used to, I think it is the digital age that we're going into in terms of jobs and career, but also in terms of constantly being on and constantly being available and also having all your information so public. So I'm excited to dive into that. Thank you for joining us on the Facebook Live. Hi, Lori. Awesome to see you. And for those of you that are watching the recording, go ahead and comment because Pat and I will be keeping an eye on things, and you're welcome to ask questions. And I'll let you know at the end how you can get in touch with Pat as well. So let's talk a little bit. What do you see what's going on today in terms of the workplace? Like, what is the state of mental health in general?
Well, I think, you know, the statistics are telling us that there's an increase in the levels of anxiety or stress, anxiety, depression, and suicide ideation. And there's no one answer to why that's so. It has many facets, but one of the things that I see as being very instrumental, number one, I think a lot of what we call depression is unresolved grief. We're a society that's become grief illiterate. We're also death phobic. And that places us in a position where we look ahead with a level of fear. Excuse me. So when I began in the year 2000, my work was very humour based,
Mm-hmm.
and it still is a huge component, but it's evolved and become much deeper. I started doing a stress, humour and health program at Auckland University, and from there really came to see that the people who came to those programs were from all walks of life. And I really got to see how when you can shift people's perceptions, life continues to go on,
Mm-hmm.
but they reach a place of being okay with things.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's about being able to work intuitively enough, be perceptive enough to ask the questions, to be such a good listener so that you can elicit what's really going on and be able to demonstrate that to them. And a lot of that came through delivering that program there. And then I can't think what year it was, maybe about 2008, I worked with Kensington Swan, the law firm in New Zealand, and they had a client intimacy program, a 5-year program to, excuse me, tail end of a cold, to evolve and grow their staff. And for me, that work, I worked with them over that 5-year period, and that work just cemented for me my entire path. It's like, yes, look at this, a law firm, and they're prepared to, they still wore their amazing suits and, carried the portfolio, but now they were engaging at a much deeper level. And it took a lot of work to get the lawyers especially to go there.
Mm-hmm.
But that pathway enabled them to be invited by Abu Dhabi to come to Abu Dhabi and set up a firm there. And the Abu Dhabians opened up that whole pathway. So it happened with ease and grace. And Chris Helbraun, who was the CEO then, said to me, he said, Pat, it was about who we were being. And, in the past, they'd used large sums of money to, create a pitch. And, let's have, just for example, we'll make a pitch for Vodafone and, X amount of money is invested in that. And the whole idea of this initiative was to really shift that and have people come back to be engaging, just as you and I are here today.
It's amazing to hear about a company that will commit something like commit to like a 5-year investment. Do you think, are we seeing more companies value wellness, value mental health in their own workplace? And maybe not 5 years, but, committing more time, more energy, more dollars into that?
Yeah. I've just, here in Australia, done a 15-month project working with a company called Programmed. They have 26,000 staff, and I delivered to 450 of their leaders. And it's been the most profound experience I've had working in this area. The program was designed to educate them a little about, stress, depression, anxiety, suicide ideation, but not, they're not going to be a diagnostician. They don't need to have that much information, but enough for them to shift their thinking and see with new eyes, and then be able to support them to, how do I go with the conversation once I've said, are you okay? What next? How do I get deeper into that conversation? And this company just, I wrote a case study afterwards because I was just so taken by all of these men, their willingness, even though it was awkward sometimes, to share vulnerably, and the degree to which they all saw. For example, one man shared about his manic depressive father who still suffered quite badly with manic depression and his lifetime journey with that. And there were about 20 or 30 other men in the room, and they were just shocked. And all of them were like, I didn't know that. And you could just, the whole energy in the room changed. And I think as a nurse, I learnt to create a high trust environment really quickly. You had to. You walk in and we're going to be doing something pretty horrible to you, maybe. So it's got to be that trust happen quickly. So I can't define exactly that, but I do now intentionally orchestrate at the beginning of a program a range of processes and a level of conversation that opens up the place for people to share vulnerably. Mm-hmm. And each day there was just the most remarkable sharing and realizations. One man shared during the course that he and his wife went walking every afternoon after work. He said, but Pat, he said, I want to share with you. He said, she drives me mad because she never stops talking on that half hour. And we were interrupted, but I said to him, there'll be something here for you today. And I said, just wait, it will appear. And when we closed and went around the room, what are you leaving with? He actually stood up and he said, Pat, I'm going home today to be present to my wife. I didn't know until today, but my wife suffers with anxiety. And I didn't know. And his peers gave him a standing ovation. All men, right, predominantly male for all of the programs. And I just really got, this is new. This is different. And the biggest ethos that they hold in the company is if you see it, own it. So when I was in Melbourne, in Collins Street, there was something happening over the road, and one of the board members actually was in the room, and he said, excuse me, Pat, I'll be back. And he went across the road, oversaw something, and then returned. And I said, where did you go? And why did you go over there? And he shared it, that what he'd seen was very dangerous in terms of some other workmen's practice. And I said, oh, so some of your men? And he said, oh, no, not my men. He said, but I believe, and we all believe, if you see it, own it. So you can't let something proceed once it's come into your vision. Mm. And that's really sat with me very strongly ever since. Often we're told, you don't interfere, it's not your business, stick in your own paddock, and that's not true. And I think especially today, that's not true. So many people are suffering. The farming community here is suffering terribly. There are many suicides happening on some of the farms because they're just not managing drought and flood. The opposing kind of impacts there.
Mm.
And
we've got the same thing going on here, I think, in terms of that as well, the stats.
Yeah. So, life is in many ways, we have all that technology which supports us to some extent, but it still doesn't shift the way in which life can impact on us and the degree to which we need each other more than ever.
I'm just sitting here listening to you, and there's so many points when I want to just dive in, but I'm just absorbing it. And gosh, I want to commend you actually on all the work you've done. I know it's been such a long journey, and life does this, right? And careers, like you started out in nursing, but now you're going back like we all do, and you're using some of those skills when you're trying to create this high trust environment in a really short time. But one of the things I want to hone in on is men. Like, I love talking about men. If you guys haven't seen it, check out my interview with Rich Ellis when we talk about men, men's health. But I love that you're in that space, because I think a lot of men do feel a lot of pressure, and the fact that you create this high trust environment where they can share a story like the two that you mentioned there, and then they turn to, and it creates bonding, it creates connection, it creates oh, so now I don't just see you as my CEO or whatever, I see you as a person. And that's when people feel like they're connected. And also other people in the room go, oh my God, you went through that. I'm not alone. Like, I'm not the only one. I thought I was the only one that had anxiety or that had a, manic depressive father or whatever. So the work that you do, I think, is so crucial, and the trickle down effect of that in terms of when those men go home, like you said about the guy that was going to be president of his life, when they go home, right? And then I know the other side of the story because I work, a lot with women, author of a parenting book, and the moms at home holding the baby, or the moms at home making the dinner, or whatever. And I feel like it's like our two worlds coming together here.
Yes. He was a changed man, because he saw that, then his whole view of the world is going to be different. And all of these people held key leadership roles. That was the other thing that I really marveled at. In many of the years gone by, I've often delivered to teams, and often long term, it's not that effective, because they go back into the same environment where leadership has not been doing the same work, and people get disheartened and disgruntled because what's the point? We went away and did this and it was great, but we're coming back into the same system and structure and lack of listening or whatever it is. Programmed, committed that, the top leaders are going to do the work and we're going to go deep. They have an incredible domestic violence program that's been developed, which is available immediately. Like, there's no form to fill in. You don't have to wait and get approval. If you're in crisis, then you're supported. And there's, accommodation and phone and laptop and a whole range of physical resources to get you through that first week or so and get settled a little. And the investment of these leaders in developing themselves so that they can lead that and lead it so well and lead from the heart. One of the board members one day, I don't know why it came up, but I shared that I'd lost my first child, a daughter. Excuse me. And when I did that, he sat back in his chair and he went, now I get you. So we don't know what story is going to influence somebody and have them see you in a new light, which is why I encourage my clients who are learning to speak. If the story's there, it needs to be told. If it's sitting there, if it's something that your soul wants to express and needs to come out, then there's people out there waiting to hear it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Two things that I'll share actually from my recent experience. And I love, I'm a big believer in divine timing. So, you and I were meant to do this recording earlier. You've got that cough that you're just almost through. But it's great because I have these two little bits of gold that I'd love to share that I didn't have before. So like you, like me, like a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs, we're constantly putting ourselves in positions to learn more, right? Like we can always learn more. And most of us, I think, are very growth mindset type people. Anyway, I went to this conference in the Gold Coast. It's the doTERRA Leadership Convention. And we had two speakers that the topics they spoke about really, really resonated and had synergy. So one shared some of Brené Brown's work. Remember, she taught, you guys know the famous TED Talk, and she talks about vulnerability. But the topic we talked about was called courageous leadership. And I think what you're doing is you're empowering those people, those leaders, to be courageous in their leadership. And one of the questions that was asked at this one-day event on this topic was, when things get hard, you come up against someone in your business or your marriage, or, things get hard, how do you, and the term is armor up. How do you armor up, right? Put your armor on. And they didn't say, do you do this? Do you do that? They just asked the question, how do you armor up? And it was so fascinating because some people around me were like, oh my gosh, I armor up by quitting. I go, you know what? Things are hard. I'm out, right? And they're like, I've quit a marriage. I've quit this, I was training for a marathon, but it got too hard. So, and they notice this pattern in themselves. And someone else would be like, oh my gosh, I'm an avoider. I put my head in the sand. When things get too hard, whereas other people, they do the silent treatment. If they have it gets tough with someone, they don't talk to them for 2 weeks or 2 days or whatever. And my response was, oh my gosh, do you know what I do? I just go, you know what? I'm just going to do it myself. I go high achiever, lone ranger on it. I just go I'm just going to get it done because activator is one of my top 5 strengths, but none of these are better or worse. It's just interesting to look in the mirror and just say, how do I armor up when things get hard? And then you go, okay, is this working for me? What could I do differently? That was day 1. The next day we had another speaker who talked about similar concept. When in times of struggle, when things get hard, in times of struggle, how do you react? And he said most people either do one of 2 things. And he had a little arrow going up. They either evolve or develop. And you talked about evolution just before. They either evolve or develop, which I think is growth mindset, obviously I got to work harder, or obviously I've got to learn more. So they do that, or they avoid and blame, right? So some people go head in the sand, or they go, it's her fault, it's his fault. I would be successful, but because of that and that, I'm not. And I thought it was so fascinating. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I think these are really, it's so important as leaders to look at the way that we react, not just in times of success and glory, but also in the hard times, and how that's when, kind of the truth comes out to a certain extent. It's like, do we throw our toys, right? Some people explode and get really angry. Other people totally go on to shut down. So I just thought I'd throw that in there and mention it because it was just such a fascinating concept. So if anyone wants to comment below and let us know, how do you armor up when things get hard? We would love to hear. What are your thoughts on that?
Prior to 20 years ago, my solution to a problem would be to go cave.
Yeah.
Just go cave, hide out, shut down, draw in, and turn of the century with all those life events and making the choices. One of the commitments I made was whatever comes up in my life now, I'm going to go to it. So, and I have. And so...
if you see it, own it. Right?
Yes, owning my own stuff as well as what's out there. And that's led me to some pretty amazing conversations which have broken through rules, rules and parameters. I remember once, I'll make the story fairly succinct, my car had broken down. My relationship had just finished, so it was at the still very much turn of the century. And my mother sent me some money from Australia to New Zealand to get the car fixed. So I took the bank check to the bank and they wouldn't cash it. I had to wait. And I ended up being in the bank for about an hour and a half because I didn't accept that as the truth because my mother had already given them the cash. And eventually got the money and left. And I went and sat in the car and I burst into tears and I thought, I never want to be in such an unresourced place ever again. So I wrote in my journal and then I thought, I'm actually going back in. So I went back into the bank and poor young bank manager straight into his office and he's like, can I help you with something else? And I said, I've gone out and sat in the car and this is what I've journaled and I shared with him. And I said, 95% of the people who come through those doors can't manage their money very well. You can be such a resource and a strength to them if you would but shift your thinking and way of being. I said, I never want to be in this financial position again, ever. And I'm going to take some of this money that my mother sent and I'm going to open $1 million account. I said, do you want to manage that account? And he just looked at me. And look, the reason I share that story is it's kind of a funny little tale, but because I stuck to my guns, he said to me at one point in the earlier conversation, well, perhaps if you can wait a day or so and I'll try and get it cleared early. And I said, yes, I can actually. I said, I've got a tent in the car. And then I shut up. And he said to me, you're amazing. And that's when I got the money. See, it's not the truth. There are so many things that are not the truth. But we get held to be at the whim of others. And we just need to move past that.
So what happened with your $1 million account?
Oh, I'm still working on it.
It's a journey.
Yeah, it's a journey. And
all right. That's amazing. So I'll just jump in. You guys that are watching the replay, watching live, comment below mental health in the workplace. Like, what is your take on it today? And also, what is your experience yourself? Have you had times in a job? My last job was actually back in 2008. And I've worked for myself since then. But I do remember I used to bike to work, and I worked at Environment Canterbury in Christchurch. I loved biking to work. But I worked and I answered the phone, and I got the job. I got turned down so many times because they were like, you're overqualified. I had a master's in environmental education. I wanted to just get my foot in the door. So I worked in customer services, and then I worked my way up to the communications department, which is marketing and things like that. But you know what I remember? Having a job like that, I loved the people, but I was watching the clock like a crazy woman. Like I was, and I was just not in my happy place. I was waiting for the end of the day. And so I feel like for some people, their job is great because they love the security, they love the surety, they love that it ends and they can go home and focus. Whereas other people, maybe like me, I got to do my own thing. Like, I don't think I could be employed by someone because I'm so used to working in my own way. But the danger for us in terms of mental health in the workplace, us entrepreneurs, is there's no one saying, oh, you're done now, you can clock off, because we're like, oh, I'll just check my email and I'll just quickly get in touch with that client while I'm driving to the beach, So I think mental health in the workplace from an entrepreneurial perspective, we need to be in charge big time of our mental health. And there is that whole thing of there's no guaranteed income. So that can be a bit of a mindset thing. And those that are new to the business scene, like I've been in it for 8 years myself of my own business. I always say, you guys, there's seasons, there's ebbs and flows. There's times, that come and go. It is stressful. It can definitely cause anxiousness or anxiety for people. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, I know we talked about the workplace being like jobs. The conversation to more of the entrepreneurial people or those that are self-employed. Do you see the same patterns there?
Very much so. And look, I think anyone who works as you and I do, for example, who don't necessarily have staff, then we have peak times, for me to be out facilitating or perhaps talking at a conference. And then there are quieter times like today where I'm just working from home. And if I have a few of those in succession, I know I will spiral down. I love engaging with people. So if I don't have that, I'm done. So my two peak moments are speaking or facilitating and painting. So when I'm speaking or with a client and the lights go on, there's my moment and it's like, yes, I'm done. And then when I'm involved in my art, I don't need anybody else. There is just myself and the project, whatever it is. And I have to orchestrate enough of each.
Yeah.
There's for me is my balance. So knowing if people can pick two peak things and then orchestrate enough of them, then, we're not meant to be happy all the time.
Yes.
We are meant to experience it all. I actually now think joy is all of it. Joy is not just bliss. Joy is our capacity to experience this full range of emotions and become really cognizant of what those emotions are there for, what they're telling us, and work quickly to either move through it or do something as a result of it. And that's pretty extraordinary when we give ourselves time to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Often, though, we're not present to it.
So I'll ask everyone the question, what brings you joy? What in your life, like you with the painting, right? You with the painting. What in your life, you guys, brings you joy? I met with Jackie, my co-author, this morning down by the beach, and she said, do you come down to the beach often? I said, you know what? I love coming to the beach. And it's a 7-minute drive. So I'm like, I actually want to commit to going to the beach once a week and reading an actual book. Like I just got this book, I Am Worthy. And I'm like, I love reading actual books, meaning not on the phone. That's what I mean by an actual book. Not that books on the phone aren't real, but it's just different. I spend a lot of time on the screen. I'm going to segue and share another book and another thought, but I will come back to ask you something. So I'm giving you a little bit of prep here. I'd love for you to share in a moment an activity or a question that you often ask your clients that is related to wellness, mental health in the workplace. So anything that you want to share with us around an activity that you do or a question that you ask your clients. So I'll come back to that. So I wanted to share this because I think that's so fascinating how Pat mentioned about, the transition and like your peak things that you love doing and then the painting. Because the guy that I told you about that said, how do you react in times of struggle? Do you develop and evolve or do you avoid and blame? And his name is Adam Fraser, and this is his book called The Third Space. So he talked about the third space, and I'll just explain what that is. I'm going to call it, for me, it's like the transition zone. So my husband, when we first moved to Auckland after the Christchurch earthquakes, which was a big, upheaval, and he used to bike to work, and he loved it because it allowed him to have transition time from work to being dad, right? And he loved that. So then when his job changed a few years later, all of a sudden he was driving in traffic and maybe listening to podcasts or whatever, but he felt that it wasn't quite the same transition time. Anyway, this guy was talking about the concept of the third space, which he learned about from a client of his, where he observed this guy in the workplace, bossing people around and being blah, 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 manager kind of guy. And then he invited him home for dinner. And then he was at home with dinner, totally present with his family, super relaxed. And he said to him, listen, I got to ask you, how can you be such different people? Like, how can you make that so seamless and you're so present? And he said, I'll tell you my key. It's all about the third space. And he's like, what do you mean? And he said, well, when I come home, I drive into my garage. I don't go straight to see the kids. I go straight into this spare bedroom that we have. I have a shower. I change my clothes so he gets out of his suit. So he has physical changes. Then he does I can't remember, 10, 15 minutes of meditation and just gets into the zone. And he basically has a 20-minute window where he's transitioning. He's in the third space. And then he goes in and he's dad, And the other story that this guy, the actual author, shared, I think it was his story, is the moment for him was one day when he came home from work and he was kind of carrying the stress of the workday with him through the front door, and he saw his kids run away and hide. And in that moment, he was like, oh my God, I got to change who I'm being. So you know how you mentioned, Pat, who are you being, right? Who are you showing up as? And I thought, this is great. This is so fascinating for all those men out there, but also women, obviously, who also work in the workplace. How do we transition so that when we walk through the door, we are who we want to be? And if you guys have listened to me before, you've heard me say, there were times when my husband would come home and he'd be like, why is the scooter on the lawn? Have you done your homework? And I'm like, dude, rule number 1 for dads, right? Walk in the door, survey the scene. It's like risk management. Survey the scene and just see what's going on before you start calling people out. So I think what's crucial is that transition zone. I'm going to let you jump in, but I'll just finish. So what's different is for the entrepreneurs, right? We don't have the transition because usually I'm at home. It's the kids coming through the door. So the difference for us and for me is to put buffer in my schedule or transition moments where I know that 15 minutes before they walk through the door, I shut the computer, I get up from my chair, I maybe start making a snack. And if you know me, you know I do not love spending time in the kitchen. And I said to my kids a few months ago, I was like, hey, wouldn't you love it if when you came home, Mommy, I had a snack ready for you and I wasn't on my phone? They were like, oh, that would be awesome. They were so excited that I was going to be present to them. So I think for us entrepreneurs or business owners, not we have to make the commitment. It's totally your empowered choice. But I think this third space concept, or I'm going to call it the transition zone, is really super crucial to not only our own mental health, but our children's happiness. And same with hubby. Like when he comes through the door, I want to make sure that I'm in the good zone. I'm not like plonking away on my computer. Oh, hey babe, how's your day? Plonk, plonk, plonk. So I think creating that transition zone wherever you work, or even if however you work, is so, so crucial. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you've brought up a couple of things. I think the key little phrase you used in there is getting present to them. I've been studying improv acting for 20 years, and the first rule of improv is that first thought is correct. All players are equal. Nobody wins if someone tries to win. Mm-hmm. And you need to be present so you can either give or receive. That's the whole thing behind whose line is it anyway, or
I love that
activities. And what that first line did to me was give me permission to go with first thought, always. Mm-hmm. Now, first thought is not always polite. We often think, I better not say that. If I say that, somebody will get upset. So we go with second thought. And that's okay. However, our real truth, our real authentic self is in first thought. Mm. So there's been much in the school of improv that has informed my life and my art and how I be with clients. So very much coming from that space of saying what's there. You've reminded me, I remember one client, a man who was very distressed. He had actually hit his partner because she had abused his boy who has a disability. And but he was horrified that he had done that and very upset. And so it was just very intuitive. This is the first time I'd done it. I said, can you draw how you're feeling? And he just drew scrunched up eyes and very, sad lips, mouth. And we made art of that. Mm. We made a piece of art of that. And in the doing of that, it's like once you put something on the page, it's done. It's no longer in, it's out. And you've created that space because it's not the same now. It was in here, but now it's out there, and see what it looks like. And for me, I felt so privileged that this new client trusted me enough to share the story and admit that he'd hit her, and then all his feelings around that. And then he could draw a very rudimentary picture. It's like, wow, that's just profound.
It's such a powerful technique that you wouldn't think of, draw it for me. Yeah.
And so for me, my top three values are love, freedom, and spiritual intimacy. So that encounter with that man was all about intimacy. Mm. That he shared very vulnerably, and we had an incredible outcome. He went away and had some counselling and did what he needed to do, and that was great. But that moment created a lasting friendship as well.
And obviously, going back to your phrase of the high trust environment, obviously you had created a high trust environment for him to do that. So one of the things I'd love to come back to is, what is one activity or maybe a question that you ask your clients when you work with them?
Hang on. I think I'm always wanting to know how they feel. And then often, like even in my silence just then, if someone was working with me, I'd be half expecting them to say, what's there for you?
Mm-hmm.
right? So when we've got that little pregnant moment, there's something that needs to come, but it's not finding a fluid pathway. So what's there for you would be a question I would ask in the awkward moment.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I'm facilitating, I know because of the way I work, it's not traditional, that I'm going to be creating elephants in the room over the day. So I forewarn them that, this is not mental health 101 from the textbook. There are going to be a range of experience. So I prime them and preempt what's going to unfold.
Mm.
And I don't know who'll be triggered by what, but I warn them that they could be.
Mm.
And even with this last group, the business program, there were a number of men who were triggered, said nothing during the day, but did talk to their other leaders later, and that information came back to me. And it just cemented for me, it's like, yes, that's where I want to work. I want to work at that intersection. Mm-hmm. Because if those men were no longer triggered by whatever it was, then who would they be being? How much freer would they be personally? And then when we're triggered, we can't look out at the world in an open fashion.
I love this because it's almost like so far beyond team building. So what you do is not team building, but I can see that when you do it, it creates those connections and it helps people evolve, like we talked about, how to react, evolve. It helps them to evolve and develop rather than doing what they possibly did in the past when they were triggered, which is avoid, blame, armor up, head in the sand, silent treatment, whatever they used to do. So that is so amazing. Hey, we're gonna come to a close in a moment. What I'd love to ask you, Pat, something I ask everybody that I interview in my Impact Entrepreneur series, is there a certain charity, organization, book, or app that you want to do a shout out to or shine the light on?
Yeah, look, I was going to suggest my own book, but I would like to share this book. This is called Conversational Intelligence. Judith Glaser is the author, and she writes essentially about 3 levels of conversation. So level 1 conversation is, would you pass the salt? Thank you very much. Level 2 conversation is, at the beginning of the show, we would have been having a level 2 conversation, polite banter before we began. What did we say, before, and where are we going to go? So that's level 2. And then along the way then since, we've had level 3 conversations, and level 3 conversations go much deeper and see where the possibility for sharing ideas, collaboration, other possibilities could come into fruition. So we've had windows into that kind of conversation. And the book is so about high trust environments, because you can't have a level 3 conversation unless everyone is trusting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so she has some great models for creating that. So I'd like to recommend her. Yeah.
Very cool. Very good. Hey, so you guys, what I'll do is I'll make up some notes. I'll put them in when I post this on my website. It's nataliecutlerwelsh.com. And I've got a whole bunch of interviews. I've interviewed some amazing people, and I'm so excited to share them with you. And I'll include some links as well as to how you can find Pat, because probably if you're watching this, you're curious, like I am, to learn more about what Pat does. And I would just love to see her in action, in a room full of 40 people, 400 people, 4,000 people. So Pat, how can people find you or follow you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search for Pat Armitstead. Facebook, the same thing, Pat Armitstead. And then my website is still a New Zealand website, joyology.co.nz.
Amazing. I've made some really good notes, and I've taken a lot of notes here on some of the quotes that you've said, which is amazing. Shift your thinking and see with new eyes. If you see it, own it, etc., etc. You've given us some amazing gems, so thank you so much. Hey, before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to mention?
I'd like to mention another man as well. You may have even come across him. His name is James Greenshield. He runs the Resilient Leaders Foundation here in Australia, and he's one of the most extraordinary men I've ever met in my whole life. He was an Iraqi vet, suffered post-traumatic stress, went on a pretty incredible journey around that. And now I just love the degree to which he tells men to put your hand up. He said, Pat, every time I talk to a group of men, I know 85% it'd only take one more thing and they'd crack. Mm. He said, and when I asked that question, put your hand up if, and he said 85%. And so, you know, his catch cry is put your hand up. Mm. You know, so, and all of us can learn a lesson from that. I know I've been Miss Independent, left home at 16 years and 10 months, and, you know, have gone on and forged an amazing life. But there are times when I should have gone back and asked for help, but I didn't. You know, that fiercely independent streak didn't allow me. And, you know, I suffered longer sometimes than I needed to have because of that. So, you know, I don't think the same way now, but past thinking.
I think part of that, the put your hand up thing, you know, is it helps people, but particularly in this scenario, men, to realize again that, you know, they might look around and go, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. So I think you, even though you don't do that same activity, you probably do the same thing by helping them to create that I'm not the only one, and how can I move forward from it. Can you tell us before we wrap a little bit about your book?
Yes, the book that I would offer was my second book, is called Anti-Zach, A Joyful Prescription for the Unhappiness Epidemic. And so A is for amuse, N is for enthuse, T is for trust, I is for intuition, Z is for zeal, A is for attitude, and C is for creativity. And the idea for that was born on my tour with Pat Adams. And I just felt a huge link because I'd not wanted to be medicated back earlier, you know, around 2000, and went looking for another way. And so, you know, I tell people now, I wrote my own prescription and I called it Anti-Zach. And, you know, I'm not negating the value of medication. Some people do need it for a time. However, medication on its own is not going to solve all of the other issues which are about us as individuals and how we relate in our community. I think that's the biggest. We've become very alone and isolated in our community.
Which brings us back to the mental health, you know, piece, which is what this is all about. So thank you for mentioning that. Where can they find it? Is it on your website or?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Amazing. Thank you for joining me today. It was so amazing.
It's been awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for sharing so much gold, and keep us posted on the amazing work that you're doing, the incredible companies you're working with. Thank you, Lori, for sticking with us the whole time. It's longer than usual, but this has been amazing. I didn't want to cut it off sooner. So thanks you guys for watching, and definitely check out the rest of the series on nataliecutlerwelsh.com/impactentrepreneurs. All right. See you later.
Thank you. Bye.